This is the ultimate walking talking mock for question 1 of Edexcel's 2022 GCSE Computer Science Paper 2. Let's start by understanding the purpose of the question. If we look at the top of the question, we can see that there's a suggested time of 15 minutes. Therefore, I'm going to set a timer to start now. The question says, a program is required to convert numbers entered by the user to their alphabetic equivalent. Only numbers from 5 to 30 are valid. So let's pick up a few things from here. First of all, we're going to be converting numbers that are entered by the user, and we're going to be converting them to their alphabetic equivalent. Now, I suggest that you do this highlighting as well, because these are the key parts of the question. And only numbers 5 to 30 are valid. Then it says adding 60 to the number and then applying the function CHR generates the equivalent ASCII code for an uppercase letter. The question says the table shows accurate test data for a functional program. That allows us to test that our program works. So if we were to put in the number 4, for example, we know that that would be invalid input because only numbers from 5 to 30 are valid. Similarly, if we put in 31. If we put in the number 5, we can see that the output should be to tell us that 5 is equal to A. And if we input the number 22, we should be told that the output will be 22 is equal to R. Now that's really useful because we can use that at the end to see that if our program is working, but also it gives us an idea of the sort of thing that our program has to actually achieve. The question then tells us to open the file q01.py. Now if you watched the introduction video, you'll have seen that we've already created a copy of our files and put them into this completed coding folder. We've also renamed all of our files so that they are Q01 finished, Q02 finished, so that they're ready for sending off at the end. And it means we don't have to keep doing this at the end of each question. So I'm going to open, instead of q01.py, I'm going to open my finished version, although I've not done anything to it yet, of Q01 finished. Now remember, the paper is set for all of students from grades 1 all the way up to grade 9. So, for example, a student who's expected to get a grade 5 wouldn't be expected to answer questions that are set at grades 6, 7, 8 and 9. Therefore, if you're not understanding everything that we've looked at so far, don't worry, because some of the parts of the question will be for students of the highest abilities. What you need to do is look at where the marks are that you can gain. So let's have a look through exactly what we're being asked to do. It says amend the code to create an integer variable named num and set it to 0. So let's have a look. Well, at the top of my code, I've actually got a variable called decimal code, and that's been set to an integer variable of 60. And if we scroll down here, we can see this instruction, add a line to create an integer variable named num and set it to 0. Notice how that matches the question in the first bullet point on the question paper. So the variable that I need is num, and I'm going to set that to be 0. Now we're not going to do decimal places because it's asked us for an integer, so I'm just going to leave it at 0. We've now completed that part of the task, so I'm going to just put a little tick next to it so that I know that it's done. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run the code and see what happens. And we can see that it's coming up with an error on, and it's telling us on line 15. Oh yeah, well we can see that that's not been completed, so that's okay. So the next part of the question says, take the input, so we're going to be using input from the user and convert it to an integer. So let's take the input from the user first of all. Let's have a look. Complete the line to take the input from the user and convert it to an integer. So num equals input. Now I could just put input brackets, but of course that wouldn't give an instruction to the user. So let's put an instruction to the user here. Okay, please enter a number between 5 and 30. Okay, now if I run that, we can see whether that's running so far. Well, the syntax has moved to line 26. That's working so far. Let's just check if I've done everything that I was asked to do. Take the input from the user, and convert it to an integer. So we now need to make sure that this is an integer because, of course, Python takes input as text. So I'm going to change that to be an integer. And I'm just going to run my code again to make sure I've not introduced any new errors at that point. So that's great. I can tick off this as being done. Let's now look at the next part of the question. Check that the inputted number is between 5 and 30. So the check bit means that we're going to be doing a validation check. And if you look up earlier in the question over here, we were asked to only introduce numbers or allowing numbers between 5 and 30. So if we have a look at the next part, it says complete the if statement to check that the inputted number is between 5 and 30. Use 2 relational operators and 1 logical operator. So relational operators greater than, less than, equal to, logical operators and, or, etc. Now, if you're aiming for a grade 2 or grade 3, you might be a little bit stuck at this point, and that's okay, but we'll have a look at it anyway. We need to see what's actually going to happen. So it says, complete it to check that the inputted number is between 5 and 30. Now, let's have a look at what it's going to do after that, because that's important. It says, complete the line to add 60 to the number. Right, so that's what's going to happen if it's valid. And this bit says, complete the line to join strings together with concatenation, and it looks like it's going to be okay as well. So that's if it's valid. And add a line to display an error message so we can see the else part is the invalid part. So we want this to be true. So it's got to be between 5 and 30. So it's got to be at least 5. So greater than or equal to 5. If we just did greater than 5, we would only include 6 onwards. And it's got to be up to, but not including, up to and including 30. So I'm going to put less than or equal to 30. Now, remember I said it's got to be both of those. So our Boolean operator, or logical operator, is going to be AND. Now, let's run the code and see if it's got rid of that error. Okay, now, all I've just done at the moment is I've just put greater than or equal to 5, but I haven't said what is greater than or equal to 5. Well, it's the num that we want to be greater than or equal to 5, and the num that we want to be less than or equal to 30. So let's run that code again. And great, it's moved on to a different part now, so we know that we're okay with that bit so far. So I'm just going to check. I've checked that the input number is between 5 and 30, so let's tick that off. Next part of the question says, add 60 to the variable num and assign the result to the variable decimal code. Right, let's see where that is in the question. Here we go, in the code. Complete the line to add 60 to num and assign the result to the variable decimal code. Well, here's decimal code. So we're going to be assigning something to it. And we've got to add 60 to num. So we need to take whatever num is at the moment, and we're going to add 60. Okay, now notice this part of the task is actually easier than this part of the task. So if you were unable to do this part of the task, that's okay. Don't tick it off that you've done it. You can always come back and have a look later. Just focus on what you can do. So we've now added 60 to the variable num. We've assigned the result to the variable decimal code. Right, that's great. We can tick that one off as being done. Let's look at the next instruction. Join strings together with concatenation. Right, so have a look at line 25. Complete the line to join strings together with concatenation. Right, so let's see what's going on. So we're displaying something to the screen. We are converting the number to a string. And we've got is equal to, and we've got here, we're going to convert to the decimal code. So if we just go back and have a look at our instructions again, and we'll have a look under here. Remember, it was CHR generates the equivalent ASCII code. Okay, so that's going to give us that letter, the uppercase letter. Let's have a look at the sort of output that we're expecting. Something like 5 is equal to A. So here's our is we equal to, and here's our num. So we've got the number is equal to, and we've got to use concatenation. Well, concatenation is joining together strings, and we can just use the plus symbol to do that. So it's going to be equal to, and then the calculation using the function CHR. Okay, let's run our code again and see what happens. So it's now come up with an error on line 30, so that's a little bit further along, and it will be because of we've got the else, but we've got actually nothing happening with the else. So let's check, see if we've done what we're asked to do. Join strings together with concatenation. Yes, that's done. And now let's have a look at the next bit. It says we've got to display an error message. So let's match that up here. Add a line to display an error message. Okay, so this is going to be if we didn't put in the correct, the valid number between 5 and 30. So let's print an error message then. So please and only, no, it's an error message. We're not asking them to enter again, so we'll just put an error message. So you can only use numbers 5 to 30. Okay, let's run our code and see if it's working. Oh, we've actually got something happening now. That's great. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of these inputs up here. So I'm going to try and put in 5, and we'll see what it comes up with. So let's input 5, and it says 5 is equal to A. Oh, that's brilliant, because that means that bit is now working. Right, so let's see, have I done this bit? Display an error message. Yes. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to run through each of these tests to see whether our code works. Now we're going to use the tests that the exam board have provided because they've given them us for a reason. So I'm going to keep running this code, and we'll first of all we'll start off with the input of 4. We're expecting to see an output of invalid input. So I'll put in 4, okay, and I've used you can only use numbers 5 to 30. Right, okay, so the actual error message that they wanted us to use was invalid input. So I was trying to be a bit clever and put something that was helpful, but the exam board has said that this is what the output should be. It should be exactly invalid input. Okay, so that's what I put in. Now I've already tested number 5, so we'll now test 22, and we'll see if that works. So let's put in 22. Yes, 22 is equal to R, that's good. So next we'll test 30. Now 30 is a borderline case, it's right on the boundary, so we're going to check that. So we'll run the code again. I'll put in 30. Yes, that is equal to Z, that's what we're expecting. And the final one is, let's check the just about not valid, so 31. So we'll run this and put in 31, and it's come up with invalid input, which is what we were expecting there. I'm going to check that I've actually completed everything. So the program converts numbers entered by the user to their alphabetic equivalent. Yes. Only numbers 5 to 30 are valid. Yes. added 60 to the number, and then applying the function CHR generates the equivalent ASCII code for an uppercase letter. Yes, it's all doing uppercase ones. So I had to create an integer variable named num and set it to 0. Yes, I've done that, so I'm going to tick this again. I had to take the input from the user and convert it to an integer. So yes, I've done that. I'm going to check that again. Check that the inputted number is between 5 and 30. So greater than or equal to 5, less than or equal to 30. Yes, I've done that. Add 60 to the variable num and assign that to decimal code. So yes, we've done that. Tick it off. Then we had to join the strings together. So this is our concatenation to join the strings together. So yes, I've done that. And we had to display an error message. So here's our error message, invalid input. So I'm happy with that. That is that task completed. Of course, I don't know if you noticed, but we managed to complete the task and check it just as the countdown timer reached 0. That's good, because we are on track for the rest of the exam. However, bear in mind that I've been talking through this and that has slowed things down, and so this task could be completed a little more quickly. Remember what I said about each part of each question being targeted at different grades. So if you are aiming for a grade 5 or above, then you would be expected to get close to full marks of this question. However, if your target grade is a 2 or a 3, then it's perfectly acceptable for you to be getting 4 to 6 marks out of 10 for this question. The important thing is that you don't give up as soon as the question gets hard. Instead, skip that part of the question and see if there's another part where you can get marks. You can find out how to access the other walking talking mocks for questions from paper 2 and the other exam papers at www.paullong.net/WT mocks, or by clicking the link in the top right hand corner. If you do want to watch the section about how marks are awarded, then keep watching. In this final part of the video, we're going to have a look at the mark scheme, which is what the examiners use to mark your exam. So what I've got on my screen now is the mark scheme on the right hand side and my code on the left hand side. What we're going to do is we're going to go through each question, each answer in the mark scheme, and have a look and see if we got that mark or not. So a new line was added to create integer and set it to 0. For example, num equals 0. There we go, we got that mark. Next bit, use of input to display a prompt. And look, they've actually been quite generous here because they're going to allow an input without a prompt or instruction to the user. So let's have a look. We've actually used num equals input, and it's this bit they're giving the marks for. Input and then just the speech marks. So we didn't need the other bit just there for that part of the mark. But it doesn't matter that we put the extra in, that's good practice. So the next bit is conversion of the string input to be an integer using int. Okay, well we've done that here by using int just there, and that's absolutely fine, so we've got that mark. The next bit is to do with the if statement. So some of you may not have been able to do this part, and that's okay, but let's focus on those of you who could. So use of correct variable and relational operator for the lower bound, that's the lower boundary. So they wanted to either see num is greater than or equal to 5 or any of these other combinations, and we did actually use num is greater than or equal to 5. The next part was the use of the correct variable and relational operator for the upper bound. And here they wanted to see num is less than or equal to 30 or something similar that does the same thing. And if we have a look, we've done that. Next bit was the use of AND to join the range checks. So if we have a look in here, we used and we've got that mark. Now we go back to some of the easier bits now. So there was use of addition to convert to decimal code. So here, decimal code equals, well, the bit that they're actually interested in is num plus 60. So that was what that mark was for. But then if you then use assignment to set that value to decimal code, so here we put decimal code equals num plus 60, then we get that next mark. Next bit was a string concatenation used to join parts of string output. Well, here we've used concatenation, we've used plus, and we've used plus. Now it's worth noting at this point that we have used plus to concatenate, which is correct because the question's asking us to create a single string and to concatenate, join together the text from these three constituent parts. The string value of num is equal to and the character value of the decimal code. Now it would work if you used commas because we're doing a print. Because we're not actually assigning this to any particular variable, this would work using commas. And I'll just run it to show you that it actually will do it. So when we'll put in the number 7 and we can see, there we go, 7 is equal to C. However, the question specifically asked for concatenation, and because it asked for concatenation, we've got to use the plus symbol to join the strings together. And the final part of the question is invalid input message displayed is fit for purpose. So I put print invalid input, which was the exact wording that they used in their test data. So I will accept that as fit for purpose. I did originally, if you remember, put a more meaningful error message. And if this was a question later on in the exam, it might be they would expect a more meaningful error message, but we focused exactly what was said with the test data. So I prefer to actually use an instruction that tells the user what they did wrong and what they need to do to put it right. I hope you found that useful. You're now ready to look at the other questions. You can watch the Walking Talking mocks for questions from Paper 2 and other exam papers at www.paullong.net/WT mocks or by clicking the link in the top right hand corner.